Welcome to another episode of the Human-Centered Leadership Podcast. And today we have a wonderful guest who has traversed the borders of this world in which we exist, working in some of the biggest companies in the tech industry, working across so many countries. She spends 25 years, would you believe it or not, working internationally in the area of IT, working on some huge projects, running into the millions of pounds. So she has worked at the very high end of organizations and businesses, having to develop relationships around the world in order to drive more business. I'm really enthralled by the conversation that we're going to have. We've already had a conversation, and I just think that what she has to share is of such value when it comes to emotional intelligence and human-centered leadership. It's just unbelievable. Human-centered leadership, as you know, the whole idea of this podcast is really to provide a platform that other leaders can listen into to understand what human-centered leadership is and how emotional intelligence in their organizations, in their lives, in their teams can really drive performance and get trust and communication so much more effective within your environment. So our guest is also the author of the Karma and Diamonds trilogy. It's a best-selling novel, I guess, on Amazon. I haven't had the chance to read it yet. I'm looking forward to doing that. And she was also one of the very first to bring Indian IT services into the heart of the British and European companies. So I think we can safely say she's done a fair bit, and there's a lot of learning that we can have from Smita, who is now also a business coach, mentor, and yoga leader in the UK. So, Smita Joshi, thank you so much for joining us on the Human-Centered Leadership Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Cole. I'm so excited to be on your podcast and really honored that you've asked me to come on your show. It's great.
So, Smita, one of the things that you blew me away with when we were talking is just the sheer amount of work that you've done across so many boundaries, but at the highest end of business. So you must have worked in so many countries and have to sort of negotiate, I guess, build relationships across so many cultural divides. How did that happen? How did you manage that? And what were the challenges that you faced and how did you overcome that? There's about 4 questions in one, but I'm just going to let you roll with it.
Yeah. So actually, it started in a very coincidental, synchronistic way. I happened to be on a sabbatical when I was even before I turned 30, and I was just traveling across India. I took 6 months off for myself because I was at a crossroads, and but there was an inner calling. Actually, my books really center more around that inner calling, which was to discover and to kind of learn more about who I am, like who am I? And that was more of a journey that took me into India to travel up and down with swamis and yogis and those types of people. And I ended up once with one of them who happened to be, although he's a monk, he is in fact a physicist. So he had a scientific background and he was heading up some order. And he invited me to join him and his team in Delhi at a conference that was called How Science and Spirituality Meet. And I thought, that sounds interesting. Let me go with them. And while I was in Delhi, I was reading the newspapers. I make it a practice whenever I'm in any place to find out what's going on locally, and so it's very easy not to. But I found that every day when I opened the paper, there was some reference to this thing called IT services, like offshore IT services, and I did not know what that meant. So I started to look into that, and in fact, this was a very tiny, burgeoning industry that Indians were very, very excited, or specific Indians in technology were very excited about. And I learned that basically India is preparing to provide services abroad using IT skills and, to corporates. And I thought, wow, that would be something for me, because I was already in business development, in sales and so on, and relationship management and so on. So that was already something that I had a track record in. And that's when I came to London. I thought I must really look up who is providing these services, only to discover there were not many companies. There were just two. And one of them was Tata, TCS, who's still today the largest. And then there was a tiny, tiny little entrepreneurial company with 150 people in it. Well, I approached them and I basically said, I want to work with you guys. I have the skills that I think you'll be looking for here. And they said to me, well, we need a track record of 5 years in software in selling and building client bases, in technology, which I didn't have in software, but I had in telco technology. So Vodafone and so on. And it took me a few months to persuade them that I was their person. Even though my CV, and they wanted a degree, I don't have a degree. So I said, you really don't need me to have a degree. I can do this. And so in the end, I was the person that was hired. So my books, Come and Diamonds, are really about trusting your inner voice, listening to that call from within. So I kept listening to that and I kept, trusting it. And so that's how I ended up in that field. And it was at a time when India was thought of as people working in shacks. It wasn't a paradigm whatsoever that you could actually do technology business internationally with India. So it was at a time when the paradigm didn't exist. So that's how I started in that field, and the idea was to really shift the paradigm. So I ended up working with large companies, usually financial services or large corporates, who big names that you'll find in a pharmacy, farmers, and so on. I was excited about it because, it was something that I wanted to, for me, it was my way of making a difference. Because, if you can shift the perception of India in the eyes of a whole community of people where, India could benefit, I thought we were onto a winner. So I ended up then very quickly winning business, going into banks, in the beginning into a multitude of corporates, and then specializing in the areas of finance, especially banking, insurance, and then also on the telco side in the earlier days, because those were the two industries, and they probably still are, that are so fast moving in terms of technology. And so it was a huge learning curve because, one has it that because I was born in India and, because I speak Hindi and Gujarati and, I have some background to Sanskrit and stuff, that it was going to be easy to understand and work the environment, because that meant being employed by Indian companies, which, by the way, grew very, very fast. The company I was in got sold off to a very large company, and then that again got sold off. So the companies that I moved in from there on were some of the biggest. And what I discovered was actually being British Indian and being working with Indian companies, there was a huge learning curve. That was on the side of the employer, but then also on the other side with working with clients who were initially British, but again, as you know, Kul, coming from the north of England, the cultural divide, the south and the north. So the city culture is very different to, let's say, one of my clients was in one of the insurance companies in Liverpool. Totally different in how you related to them, because something that would work in the city here would be considered extremely aggressive up north.
Yes, I can see that. And I can see that happening across international divides as well. So sometimes what we talk about in emotional intelligence is understanding the social context or the social environments in which you are operating and looking at the nuances of how people show up or how that organization might behave. So what you're doing is looking at the nuances of not just the organizations where you're going to, but also the people, depending on where they sit in the country or where they sit in the world. So what are the kind of things that you were looking for so that you could build those deeper relationships?
Right. So I think the first thing is, like you very, very rightly said, you need to understand the business. You need to understand the landscape of the organization that you're walking into, which means, for example, if it's a bank, Is it a retail bank? Is it a corporate bank? Or the side of the bank that, in my roles, I ended up being the client lead for the entire group, let's say, which included investment, corporate, securities, all of those, and retail and so on. So, it was important to understand who you were talking to in the business and what their individual landscape was within so on the broader scale within their country. Then, in terms of international, how they fitted into the international scenario, into the sort of compliance area. So very legal, for example, what was going on there? What were the key areas that you needed to be clued up about? So all those things you had to, obviously, that was part of the role. And then there was the technology side. What were you bringing? What were their challenges? What could you help them with? Why? Why would you be better than your competitors? All of those types of things. But I think that if you had those in place, then it really came down, because if you didn't have those, you're not getting in through the door. So, then it really comes down to striking, chiming, like striking a chord with the senior, whether it's members of the board, whoever may be heading that. And that was normally where I would start. Some people start from below, I would start from the top. And, that would mean really understanding, even before you go in, something about them. And remember, now we have Google. You can probably learn a lot about an individual online, but you couldn't do that in those days. So it was really about very quickly understanding their own what was the culture like locally in their environment. What was going to not work, what was going to work. So that required a little bit of getting to understand the dynamics, let's call it the political dynamics. But really, it was about walking in through the door and striking a rapport instantly with somebody.
So what did you do? I mean, in terms of building rapport building is so powerful when you get it right. And it's critical in building relationships, absolutely. What kind of things would you have done to build that rapport with another individual?
I think when you're building rapport, you have to speak into the person that you're talking to. It's not about what I want from them, it's what do they need? And you need to gauge very quickly. It's, for example, if you're working in Holland, you cannot, if you're in the Netherlands, you've got to be super confident. You can't have, there's no room for showing vulnerability at the outset, right? Because that's just the way that it works over there. You've got to be very, very clear. But, and so your initial approach makes a huge difference. However, if you're going to Belgium, you want to take it slightly low key. You're not in their faces. Belgians will respond a lot more to the human touch, a lot more than maybe in the beginning. So with somebody in the Netherlands, they want to show you who's boss, especially in the senior environments. So you might expect to be challenged very quickly, like So for example, go and walk in and be asked a question that's likely to throw you off if you're not prepared. If you don't understand the culture, it will turn you into a wreck straight away because you think they're attacking you. So this is how, at that kind of level, you walk into an office, let's say up in Liverpool or Manchester, into an insurance or a bank or a building site, you're more likely to be, it's likely to be a lot friendlier. They might offer you a cup of tea. There might be, do you know what I'm saying? So you have to be prepared for how various cultures, now obviously everybody's different, but that makes a huge difference to making it through the first 5 minutes or not.
I've always found this to be hugely fascinating that, people can be so different, even in one country, depending upon where you go within that country, or even whichever industry that you go in. How would you describe the industry that you worked in? I mean, you were working in tech, but I'm guessing that your clients were in all sorts of other departmental functions, mainly in the finance by the sounds of it. What was the culture within that, and how did you navigate into that culture as you had come from a totally different industrial culture?
It's about understanding the business. So one of the, I also worked equally well in telco, for example, big names, who supply you on your mobile phone, the services on there. So it really comes down to understanding who you're talking to within the business and what their area of interest is. So if for example, if you're going into a service provider who is in a telco, mobile services or whatever, then where exactly do they fit? Are they buying? Are they the buyer? Because if they're a buyer, they'll have a different dynamic with you. They'll want to establish with you who's boss, and you need to play the game a little bit. Like you need to let them know that there's no, so you've got to avoid getting into these situations where potentially there could be playoffs, power struggles and stuff. If you're going to meet somebody who's heading up the part of the business that runs the technology on which the service is provided, then those guys are deep in stress, with technical issues. So, or they want to move to the next level. So they want to stay ahead of the competition. Where exactly are they? So it's really about gauging that and speaking their language. So partly understanding the technology of the language is important. So the jargon which they speak, that really helps to get you established, that they understand that you understand their business.
Absolutely. I don't think it can be stated enough that to speak another person's language is one of the best ways to build rapport and trust with that other individual. Because I'm guessing the business that you were in, technically, it was sales. And in order for you to make the sales, and you're talking about 7-8 figure sales, I'm guessing on some occasions, in order for you to make those kind of sales, you had to have incredible trust built between yourself and the potential client.
And the trust is built in multiple ways. So the trust isn't just individual. You've got to, first of all, they got to trust that you are the lead that they can work with.
Yeah.
So that's very important. But I built trust by bringing in other people to make sure that they knew that we worked as a team. We were not just, it wasn't, and that I had the ability to be able to influence that team. And not only the team, the different individuals, the different subject experts that we brought in, but also upstream. So you need to be able to convey that you have influence with the people that you are reporting into. So right the way to the chairman.
As you say, it's multi-tiered trust here. Trust in you, trust in the people that are around you, trust in the organization that you represent. And I'm guessing values come very, very strong into that. And every organization, every individual will have their own sort of set of values that guide them through lives. And they may not even be aware of those values, but they still have these values intrinsically within them. How did you get a sense of the values of both the individuals that you were dealing with and those of their organization so that you could resonate at that deep values level?
This is part and parcel of a skill set of somebody who leads accounts at a very high level, that you've got to do your homework. So ask your team members, what has been your experience? What is that person interested in? What should I look out for? Do they know? What is their reputation in the organization? What really pushes their buttons? What triggers them? These were things that I took a lot of time and trouble. So this means you need to have good relationships with your colleagues. And those colleagues need to be willing to share that kind of information with you, because they may not necessarily be willing to do that. And that's where the ability to strike a relatedness with somebody comes in. So you've got to, spend time getting to know your team. And sometimes in the beginning, it's not that easy. And it may also be that sometimes we need to, if we're, when I'm creating a new proposal or building a new solution for a client, the skills I need are not in my team. I need to go to a colleague who's actually a competitor in the organization, to source something that they will have done, with their client. Now, why would they want to help you? That's not an obvious, that's not a given. So there again, it really comes down to coming across, building a relationship with people where they need to like you.
Yeah, and it comes down to what the name of the podcast is, human-centered leadership. And you demonstrate human-centered leadership. You build human relationships with those around you at a level where they want to support you as much as you support them. And if you speak their language, understand their culture, understand their values and align with those, then of course you're going to have those deeper relationships.
In the recent article that I've written on human-centered leadership, which I think I shared with you, I shared that there's one thing that I've been practicing, and I learned this from an organization that I used to lead transformational programs for, and that's Landmark Worldwide. And I basically, there's one of the things that I picked up from there that really stuck with me, that, human beings essentially want three things. They want to be valued, they want to be respected, and want to be appreciated.
Absolutely.
If you can establish a relationship with someone where where you demonstrate that to them, with them, in a very casual conversation. It may just be that you speak to that person the one time on the phone and you say, listen, I need some help, and how do you do that? Well, you better start by acknowledging them. You better start by acknowledging what they've done well and who they are and what you've heard about them. Because, and there's a difference between sucking up to someone and acknowledging somebody. Acknowledgement is authentic. So, you come from a place of genuine appreciation for somebody and what they've accomplished. Now, that's where I think a lot of us tend to fall down, because if I acknowledge you, Kul, for your accomplishments, in how amazing a work you've done as a police officer and as a senior police leader, and since then in the leadership environments, if I don't know a little bit about you, I'm not able to do that. So it's important to know that about you, but then to be able to convey to you in a way where you get that I am connecting to you personally. So if I say something wonderful about you, it makes me less. Well, actually, no, it makes me more. Because what that shows is that I'm generous. I'm generous. I genuinely look up, I really appreciate, I really acknowledge the kind, I respect what you've done. So those types of things convey a lot to a human being as to whether or not they're able to trust you. And you need to practice that, because if you don't come from the heart, then it sounds sycophantic, and then somebody will get that. And then it's very transactional and opportunistic. And the other side of that, when they are willing to support you, and they, never forget it. Never forget it, because even today, one of my colleagues, that's helped me out on my journey along the way, I'm still in touch with many of them. And even if I just come across them online or somehow we reconnect, it's the first thing I'll mention to them. How important it was and how I really appreciated that then, and I still do. So I think connecting with somebody, building rapport is not difficult. It means you've got to be open in your heart space. You have to be willing to acknowledge the other person authentically, like really see you've got to be interested in that person.
And do you know what? These are just basic human skills and ancient wisdom, really, that we should all have been practicing for a long, long time. But in this very fast environment, very competitive world in which we exist, it's very easy to forget these very basic human skills and this wisdom. But if you start practicing, it will change your life. It truly will, and the relationships around you. I've enjoyed having a really good conversation with you. We've come to the end of our podcast, but I want to thank you so much for being a part of it and sharing this incredible experience that you've had. I hope that others will learn from the experiences that you've had and start building some really powerful relationships around them. Thank you, Smita Joshi.
Thank you so much, Kul. Really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.